A winter walk in Priory Park. Winter had come to Priory Park, and all around was cold and still. The wisteria that grew against the old house was now just a twisted maze of woody vines jostling for position on the cream-coloured walls, waiting patiently for spring, when the first buds would come to life with the promise of a dazzling display of vibrant purple flowers and the heady aroma of its sweet perfume hanging in the air. But for this moment in time, it was resting and waiting. The many trees that filled this ancient parkland were now bare of leaves, their gnarled, lichen-covered branches reaching skywards, as if trying to embrace the pale remnants of winter sunlight, and the evergreens that grew alongside them, with their dense, fresh-scented foliage, provided much-needed protection for the various animals that called this place home. One crisp, bright morning, a fox peered out from under the thicket where she slept and sniffed the air. Today was the perfect day for a winter walk, she thought to herself, and ducked back inside to wake her young cub, who was still curled up, fast asleep. His wide, bushy tail was twitching back and forth, and she could only imagine what adventures he was having in his dreams. She gently nuzzled his small, pointed face and licked his large, fuzzy ears until he opened his eyes, yawned, and stretched himself awake. "Time to get up, little one," she said soothingly, giving the cub an encouraging nudge, "as today is the perfect day for a walk in the park." The young cub was warm and comfortable in the safety of the thicket, and absolutely did not want to go outside in the cold. He wrinkled his nose in displeasure, saying to his mother in a high-pitched whine, "But it's too cold outside, and," he continued defiantly, "there's nothing to see, nothing to do, and no one to talk to, so I will be bored, bored, bored." He made sure this last "bored" was long drawn out, just to make it clear that he really wasn't in the mood. The mother fox chuckled, shaking her head in amusement at the young cub's stubbornness, which was not unlike herself at that age. "Very well," she said, "I will set you a challenge, which I'm sure you won't be interested in, as you are so busy here snoozing in our den." The cub, who was pretending not to listen to his mother's words, twitched his ears, waited a while, and eventually replied, "I might be interested. What's the challenge, Mother?" "I'm very pleased you asked," she responded. "And my challenge to you is to accompany me to the great oak, as there is someone I want to call on. If you still don't want to be outside after that, then we will come home." The cub wrinkled his nose again, this time deep in thought. He said, "I didn't think anyone lived at the great oak. It's just a tree, isn't it?" Mother Fox merely smiled at his words, knowing that the cub must work this out for himself. "I'd like to know who lives at the great oak, and it's not that far, so perhaps we'll just walk there and then come home." "Good," said his mother. "Now wash your face and we'll be off." And with this, the cub licked his paws and gave his face a quick swipe, as his least favourite activity, other than having to get out of bed, was to wash his face. The two foxes crept out from under the thicket and into the chilly winter morning. The park was glistening with the first frosts that touched every branch, leaf, and blade of grass with a crystal sugar coating of ice, and a hint of the pastel yellow winter sun was beginning to sparkle between the bare branches of the trees. The small fox sniffed the air, gave himself a quick shake to puff out his fur, and was ready to take a walk with his mother. They trotted side by side along the grass path and past a walled garden, their paws crunching across the frozen ground. A blackbird was scuttling about amongst the ivy that clambered over the red brick wall, enjoying an early morning feast of rich dark berries, and as the foxes passed by, let out its distinctive "chuk, chuk, chuk, chuk" warning call. It need not have worried, as mother and child weren't interested in a blackbird breakfast this morning. As they approached the great oak, a small, furry grey creature could be seen darting between the trees. its bushy tail twitching as it leapt across the grass. "Who's that?" asked the fox cub curiously, and his mother replied, "That is a squirrel, and it looks very much like it's lost its larder again." The small fox looked puzzled. "How can you lose your food?" he asked. Mother Fox smiled, and her eyes twinkled with mirth. "Well, I shouldn't laugh," she replied, "but squirrels are forgetful creatures and can never remember where their favourite food is hidden, which is why you'll always see them in the park, scurrying about this way and that. It's enough to make you dizzy." She went on to explain to her inquisitive child that a squirrel's favourite food is acorns, and in the autumn, when the acorns fall from the oak trees in the park, they rummage through the fallen leaves to collect as many as they can before the cold weather sets in and food is scarce. Then they bury the acorns all over the park in different places so that none of the other squirrels will find them. The only trouble is, when the time comes to retrieve this buried treasure, they've forgotten where most of them are. "It's a good job they eat other seeds and fruit as well," she finished, "but they do love their acorns." As the foxes walked past the busy squirrel, they could hear it muttering, "Now, they could be over here. Oh, or they could be over there. Or did I put them over there?" And it scrambled up the nearest tree and disappeared through the branches, still muttering away. The small fox laughed at this silly creature, but said to his mother, "I hope the squirrel finds the acorn soon," as he knew that it wasn't very nice having a rumbling tummy. "Oh, don't you worry," the older fox replied. "Squirrels may be forgetful, but they are clever in other ways and will find opportunities to fill their tummies." It wasn't long before they reached the great oak, which was the biggest and oldest in the park and had grown from a small acorn many, many years ago. The small fox wondered if perhaps this tree was once a squirrel's lost dinner, and then wondered again at how many of the other oak trees in the park were in fact planted by squirrels. Lost in his thoughts, the fox cub hadn't noticed that someone else had joined him and his mother at the tree, and he looked up with a start to see a pair of huge round eyes peering down at him from one of the lower branches. Such knowing and wise eyes, surrounded by a face of soft feathers in mottled shades of brown and white. "Hello, who are you?" he asked, his eyes wide at the sight of this magnificent creature. "And why do you live here in the mighty oak?" Tawny Owl blinked her wide eyes, and the hint of a smile played around the edges of her sharp beak. "Who are you indeed?" she said. "I was about to ask you the same question." And she moved down to the branch that was just above the cub's head to take a look at this youngster with all the questions. The little fox's eyes grew even wider, and he was quite taken aback, as most of the other creatures in the park made all sorts of noise and clatter when they moved around the trees and the shrubs and the hedgerows. But the owl made no sound. She just appeared as if by magic. "Wow!" he exclaimed. "How did you do that?" The owl chuckled to herself. "Ooh, more questions. Don't forget to leave yourself some time to find out the answers too." The cub was a little embarrassed and hid behind his mother, but Tawny Owl was kind and wise and told the little fox that she was very pleased to hear his question, as they showed he had a great interest in the world around him. She went on to explain that her feathers were so soft and light she could fly in absolute silence, and as she hunted for her food in the quiet hours of darkness, she needed this skill to make sure she didn't go hungry. She had lived in the mighty oak for many years and knew all about the life of the park and the changes that occurred throughout the seasons, and invited the little fox to visit her again, and she'd tell him all about the plants and animals that made this special place their home. "Thank you, Owl," said Mother Fox. "We shall be sure to return, but I promised this little chap we'd go home after visiting you, so we'd better make our way back now." The little fox, who earlier had not wanted to go out for a walk in the park, was now starting to enjoy being outside and didn't want to go back home just yet. But Mother," he whispered, "I don't need to go home yet. I'm not really very tired." Mother Fox looked lovingly at her cub. "Then we shall continue our walk for a little longer," she said. "Would you like that?"
"Oh, yes, please," replied the little fox, and bidding Tawny Owl a polite goodbye, they set off again through the park.
The sun was higher in the sky now, illuminating the shrubs and plants and making the bright red berries of the holly and the sweet rosehips shine like jewels. Their route took them past the large pond, where the ducks were sitting out of the icy water on an island at its centre, huddling together for warmth, with their beaks tucked under their wings.
"That water looks very cold," observed the little fox. "I don't think I'd like to take a swim today."
A rustling sound at the water's edge startled him, and looking down, he met the gaze of a small creature with sharp, beady eyes and a long tail, the piece of grass that it had been chewing sticking out of the side of its mouth.
"Oh, a rat!"
exclaimed the little fox and jumped backwards. The small creature looked most offended.
"I am most offended,"
it said indignantly, still chewing on the blade of grass.
"A rat indeed! I am a vole, and this is my house. Nice little spot by the water, very secluded."
Now, if there was one thing the little fox had been taught by his mother, it was to be polite. So he swiftly and sincerely apologised to the vole for this case of mistaken identity.
"No harm done," said the vole. "It is a common mistake, but just so you know for future reference, us voles have a shorter nose, a nice furry tail, and—"
it did a quick scan around to check that no one else was listening.
"We don't stink like they do, but don't tell them I told you that,"
it said seriously. "I promise I won't," said the little fox. He let out a small yawn, and his mother nudged him gently. "Come along now, you look like you're getting tired, so we should head back home." The cub didn't argue, as all the fresh air and exercise had made him feel a little sleepy. They bid the vole farewell, and Mother Fox guided her cub back through the park in the direction of the old house. On their way back home, the little fox chattered excitedly about everything he had seen that morning, and as they walked, they marvelled at the spiders' webs stretched across the plants and hanging from frosted wooden gateposts like tiny chandeliers. As they reached the old house, Mother Fox said to her cub, "Wait here a moment, and I'll be back soon with our breakfast," before trotting off to the back door of the building. The little fox was rather confused, but the mention of breakfast made his tummy rumble and he licked his lips in anticipation. He didn't have to wait long, as his mother reappeared soon afterwards, carrying something in her mouth, and that something looked very delicious indeed. The family who lived in the old house loved the park and felt very lucky to live there, surrounded by all the wonders of nature, and because of this they liked to look after their extended family. The birds were left tasty crumbs and peanuts on the bird tables set out in the walled garden, which the squirrels enjoyed too. The ducks on the pond were thrown morsels of granary bread, oats and seeds to supplement their diet, and the family made sure that as many of the plants and flowers in their garden were left to set seeds and berries for all to enjoy. The foxes weren't forgotten, as the cook left scraps of meat and the occasional egg or two by the back door as a treat for them, but made sure this was before the dogs and cats were awake and helping themselves. Exclaimed the little fox between mouthfuls of roasted chicken. "This is the best breakfast. Thank you, Mother." The older fox bent down and licked his face clean. "Now," she said, "I think it's time to go home for a nap." And with full, warm bellies, they strolled back to the thicket. As Little Fox snuggled up next to his mother in their cosy den, he asked her when they could next go out. "But I thought you said it was boring outside the den with nothing to do," she smiled. And the little fox looked at her with surprise. "Oh no, Mother, there's so much to see. How could I ever get bored of a walk in the park?" And with a big yawn, he settled down to sleep.